Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all on this special occasion. I'm very pleased to have you all with us online. In particular, I would like to welcome Professor Gustavo García López and Professor Seye Abimbola. My fellow Rector Magnificus Frank van der Duin Schouten, Magnificus of the Erasmus Universiteit in Rotterdam, the Rector of the International Institute of Social Studies, Professor Inge Hutte, and all the other members of the curatorium of the Prince Claus Chair. And of course, a special word of welcome for the patron of the Prince Claus Chair, Her Majesty Queen Maxima. Your Majesty, I gladly give the floor to you.
I should be used by now that I have to put the mute button off. Thank you, Professor Kummeling, for your introductory remarks. And great to see that the Prince Claus Chair has been continued to work despite all the COVID-19 pandemic limitations. And I know what a very big challenge this must have been all this last year and a half. So the fact that we're here today, it actually strengthens or illustrates the essence of the Prince Claus Chair, which is that academic excellence knows no borders. 7 years ago, we had the honor and pleasure to actually give the then, I was then the chairman of the curatorium, to give the baton to the next chair, and that was Professor Louis Gunning. Professor Louis Gunning has done a wonderful job as a chairman of the chair. And I would say, in a process of innovation, while safeguarding really the essence and the founding ideas of the chair, I would really like to thank Professor Gunning a lot for all the work that she's done and all that she's actually meant in the last 7 years in her work as a chairman of the chair. Of course, the baton now goes to a new chair, and I'm delighted to say that Professor Bert Koenders, a highly qualified and broadly respected successor, will take over. It is really my hope that Professor Koenders will take this Prince Claus Chair on Development and Equity further in the coming years, and I wish him all success, and I look forward to the next years of cooperation. And of course, now I would like to congratulate the two chairs, Professor Abimbola and Professor García, and wish you all successes and all the collaboration you'll be having with the Netherlands, but also amongst you and also with all chairs to really make this 2 years a very big success. With these very short words, I would like to give the floor over to the organization and wish you much success in all your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your warm words. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living in an exceptional phase of human history. The impact of the coronavirus pandemic is extremely far-reaching. All over the world, we see people enduring great suffering. We can also see the huge level of inequality in the world, which is growing rather than shrinking as a result of the pandemic. This is distressing and makes the essential nature of the work carried out by the various PCC chairholders extremely clear. The Prince Claus Chair in Equity and Development was established in 2003 by the International Institute of Social Studies, ISS, and Utrecht University. The chair is intended to boost the careers of outstanding young academics from developing countries and to encourage knowledge sharing. By means of this chair, the universities wish to advance research and education in the field of equity and development in accordance with the views and the insights of Prince Claus. This is now more relevant than ever. As a result of the pandemic, a number of things have had to be scaled back. However, I'm very happy to say that we are not just celebrating one inaugural lecture today, but 2 of them, albeit online. There have also been some benefits in organizing a joint inaugural lecture, as the 2 chairholders have already been in contact with each other and the former shareholders can also be present. This strengthens the bonds in the PCC family. And these bonds are necessary. We have seen this time and time again in the pandemic. In order to cope with the pandemic and make progress in the area of equity and development, it is crucial for us to connect insights across borders. Insights from different academic fields and different social actors and sectors. And at Utrecht University, we work together on 4 major strategic themes. And it is significant that Professor Abimbola contributes to all 4 of them, namely life sciences, pathways to sustainability, and dynamics of youth and institutions. At this point, I would like to thank both Professor Abimbola and Professor García López for the ways in which they contribute to the PCC. I look forward to the inaugural lectures. However, I would first like to give the floor to Professor Frank van der Duyn-Schouten, Rector Magnificus of Erasmus University, Rotterdam.
Thank you very much, colleague Henk Kummeling. Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, the inaugural lectures today are to mark the appointment of 2 international scholars on the chair that was established in the name of Prince Claus of the Netherlands, who was honorary fellow at the Institute of Social Studies, ISS. The scholars who will today accept their appointment are Professor Gustavo García López from Puerto Rico, now at ISS at Coimbra, and Professor Seye Abimbola from Nigeria, now at ISS and also active in Australia. Alternating the nomination of this chair is under the responsibility of Utrecht University and the Erasmus University Rotterdam. As the ceremony in Rotterdam last year had to be cancelled due to COVID, we are most grateful for the hospitality of Utrecht University to combine both inaugural lectures today. The involvement of 2 universities with ISS goes back to 2009, when it was decided to move ISS from the safe environment of Utrecht University, with its very strong faculties in social sciences, philosophy and humanities, to the more business-oriented environment of Erasmus University Rotterdam. Erasmus University indeed holds internationally strong positions in economics, business, medicine, and public administration. But does this create a safe and inspiring environment for a small institute like ISS, concentrating on equity and development? Although I have not been involved in the discussion in 2009, I can very well imagine that the decision for ISS to move to Rotterdam was inspired by the parable of the leven, zuurdesem in Dutch. The parable of the leven told in the Gospel of Matthew. The parable goes like this. The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. I'm not going to suggest that ISS looks like the kingdom of heaven, although it might be something to strive at. But what can be concluded is that over the last 12 years, ISS influenced the environment of Erasmus University like a small piece of leaven in 3 measures of meal. The increasing interest by our internationally reputed medical school for global health and the attention nowadays paid by our School of Economics and the Rotterdam School of Management for Sustainable Development and Inclusive Prosperity, they are undeniable signals that the 3 measures of meal are being leavened as a whole. This is for the benefit of our university, for the city of Rotterdam, and last but not least, for the many students who come to Rotterdam to study economics, business and medicine. It is therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that with great interest I look forward to both inaugural lectures and to the leavening role that the new appointed professors will play in our academic environment. Thank you very much.
Your Royal Highness, dear colleagues, friends, and of course, dear Gustavo and Seye. It's my turn now to introduce the first speaker of this morning, Professor Gustavo García López, the Prince Claus Chair holder in Equity and Development of 2019 at ISS. Gustavo just started September 2019, a few months after he faced the corona crisis in March 2020. He faced it at a moment that he just had finalized the manuscript of his inaugural lecture that was planned for the month of April, offline, that means. Also from that moment, he could not visit us anymore. And the same holds for the postdoc researcher, Dr. Diego Andreucci, who came to us in March 2020, was with us actually for a couple of days only, and then had to return to Spain because of the corona crisis. Now, this doesn't mean that both of them did not conduct and work on Prince Claus Chair activities. They did, and they actually worked a lot. Amongst others, on rethinking and finding other new ways to do fieldwork and data collections in times of corona. Both Gustavo and Diego have been very much in touch with ISS researchers, with Will Hout, who was the chair of the selection committee, and with several other ISS researchers, and also with researchers, activists and artists who participate in a network that prepares the Degrowth Conference that will take place in August at ISS. We at ISS are very happy and lucky that two of such engaged researchers are actually with us in a corona crisis in a virtual community of ISS. Given this, I'm very happy that finally Gustavo can give his inaugural lecture in the field of sustainable development, inequalities and environmental justice. Some background: Gustavo has a PhD in public policy and political sciences from the University of Indiana, Bloomington in the USA. His PhD thesis is entitled Scaling Up from the Grassroots, the Role of Intercommunity Organizations in Community Forestry in Durango, Mexico. He has been working at the Graduate School of Planning at the University of Puerto Rico. He's now on leave and works at the moment at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Before, he also worked at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, for the government of Puerto Rico and for non-profit organizations. So that combination, I'm sure we will find back in his inaugural. Of course, now he is with us at ISS, the Institute of Erasmus University Rotterdam. Gustavo, I'm very happy that you will be another year with us and really come to us in the Prince Claus Chair period. I hope to see you and Diego very soon in person at ISS in The Hague. And please now enlighten us with your inaugural lecture on decolonial climate future in the Caribbean, justice and sustainability from the front lines of the climate crisis. And to the audience, please enjoy his inaugural.
Thank you very much, Inge. Buenos días, buenas tardes, to those in other latitudes. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you to the rectors of Utrecht and Erasmus universities, to Queen Maxima, to the curatorium of the Prince Claus Chair, and everybody else who has made this possible. I want to talk to you about making climate commons. In his protest song against US imperialism in the late 1960s, Puerto Rican artist Roy Brown sang, "Fire, fire, the world is on fire. Fire, fire, the Yankees want fire." From Puerto Rico to Chile, Vietnam, Guinea-Bissau, and the Congo, fires raged from independence struggles, military invasions, dictatorships. 50 years later, we speak again of a world on fire from the climate crisis, but also from the people making collective worlds of justice, freedom, self-determination, and interdependence. I want to reflect on the historical interconnections between these different worlds on fire, the fires of the climate crisis and the fires of colonialism, and will venture into what a decolonial climate future can look like. I will do so drawing on my experiences from the islands of Boriquén, Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, into which I was born, and in conversation with scholars and activists engaged in this reimagining. I want to think of climate justice as freedom struggles. That is, justice seeking to remake livable lives beyond colonial extractivism. Climate justice in relation to land, sovereignty, and commons making, caring for territories and our human and non-human families, democratically, equitably, free. I am we, power to the people. I speak with many who have come before me. I am here thanks to my parents who have loved me deeply, taught me justice and care for the earth, my abuelas to whom I pray for light, and all my family, ancestors, friends, mentors who have accompanied me in this journey. I come expressing sorrow, joy, and love from our Boriquén home islands. I come inspired by the Zapatistas who have arrived these days to Europe to seek what makes us equal and to make clear we are still in rebellion for life. I come with the word as a flower which will not die, a word that came from the bottom of history and earth, which can no longer be torn by the arrogance of power. I want to plant this seed so it flowers in the land of the coquí, as rapper Luis Diaz says. I come thinking, feeling the contradictions of speaking about decolonization while receiving an award from a prince, as a white-skinned Latino man embracing Afro-Taino heritage. I come knowing myself as colonized, but also as colonizer, wearing a white innocence mask. I come to speak truth to power, humbled by the many world beings that have given life for justice and freedom, many networks of care and commons making that support me. I am here thanks to Irina, intellectual partner, friend, instigator, carer, mother of our daughter Maya. I am here because of Maya, who means mountain, mother, courage, love. Maya, who talks to trees to thank and protect them. She who has taught me so much in so little time, but what matters most in life, heart, care, truth, and to whom I owe the responsibility to give everything to help build a livable future for all. I promise her, no one is going to devour us, to push this ocean over the edge. I tell her, for us, joyful rebellion, for us, insurgent dignity. Colonialism institutionalized racism to justify accumulation of wealth and power. To remember this history is to purposefully take stock of the magnitude of colonial damage in order to redress it. Memory is justice. Nothing is complete without it. Colonialism destroyed ancestral ways of life and knowing being. It gave rise to the idea that all territories found were resources for the colonizers. It was a veritable catastrophe, a genocide and ecocide, which was entangled with the privatization of the global climate commons. This CO2-onialism persists to this day in many forms, in dramatic North-South inequalities, extractivist policies, corporatocracy, militarism. We can see climate colonialism in the obscene climate inequalities between rich and poor. As the image shows, the richest 10% of the world consumes and generates 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions, while the poorest 50% of the world, the ones most impacted by the climate crisis, generate only 10% of these emissions. Since the imperial industrial revolution, rich countries took as loans the emissions of the future for the rest of the world, generating an ecological climate debt, which added to the already existing colonial debts awaiting reparations. Because of these inequalities, the Anthropocene is not of all humanity. It is an anthro-obscene, a scandalous thing, a monstrosity. Climate colonialism is evident in international negotiations where the richest countries have resisted binding emissions reductions and climate reparations. As shown in the graph in the Paris Agreement, the poorer countries have pledged more reductions than their fair shares, while the richer countries, the one with more capacity and responsibility to act, have done the opposite. This substantial ambition gap will deprive us of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees. As the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance argued in the 2009 Copenhagen conference, this amounts to suicide. Thus, we chant, no to climate colonialism, no to genocide. This climate genocide repeats the colonial logic of some regions being zones of extraction, of sacrifice, of disposability, of subhumans. This is seen in the increasing number of environmental defenders killed every week, hundreds and growing every year, and the countless others silenced by threats to destroy the forests like Seye Claudio and Maria in Brazil, to build the dams like Berta Cáceres in Honduras, to extract the oil like Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria, to mine the lands like Datu Kailo Bontulang in the Philippines. These deaths become justified in the name of progress. The same logic repeated by Forbes magazine recently, celebrating how the current pandemic made so many new billionaires in 2021. Climate colonialism is in how 100 fossil corporations are responsible for 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, in how Exxon makes more money in one financial quarter than the entire GDP of dozens of sub-Saharan nations. We see it in the environmental crimes of Exxon in Alaska, Shell in Nigeria, Chevron in Ecuador, Total in Mozambique, and so on. In the cancerous fossil fuel alleys from Louisiana and Navajo land to Guayama, Puerto Rico, and Ogoni land. In the fact that these corporations knew and hid evidence of climate change for 50 years, in their deceit and double talk, publicly declaring support for climate action while spending billions to bribe public officials to obstruct action, promote climate denialism, to greenwash their image. We see climate colonialism in how a Black man is killed for being Black, while these corporations face no accountability for what are no less than unprecedented crimes against humanity. We see colonialism in how governments, prime ministers, royal families own, subsidize, lobby for these corporations, while the major banks spend trillions financing them, even after the Paris Agreement. The same banks like JP Morgan Chase that gamble, launder, defraud, and blackmail to make a killing from highly indebted countries such as Puerto Rico. Climate colonialism is in the US military-industrial complex, with hundreds of bases all over the world ready for invasion. It is the largest global consumer of petroleum and a major emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, a military that facilitates controlling territories for extracting fossil fuels. The global carbon footprint is thus also a global bootprint. Climate colonialism is deepest in the islands of the Caribbean and the Pacific. They are amongst the most impacted by the climate crisis, yet amongst the least sovereign, as we can see in this map of the Caribbean, and all the islands that are still owned or administered by international northern countries. Our islands are seen as remote and isolated, depopulated, less important, poor, at the same time that they are subjected to intensive exploitation. We see climate colonialism in the logic of let them drown as islands disappear with sea level, the same logic that pushes refugees to drown in the Mediterranean. The same that US Security Advisor Henry Kissinger used to justify the nuclear bombing in the Marshall Islands when he said, "Who gives a damn about so few people living there?" He then won the Nobel Prize for it. In Puerto Rico, this climate colonialism is seen in the plans for free zones for development that the United States began in the 1960s to turn us into the showcase for the rest of Latin America, for petrochemicals to refine their most toxic fuels, and for their military to train their armies and test their weapons, such as Agent Orange. A plan that, if fully executed, would mean genocide for us, similar to how they made Guam and the Marshall Islands practically uninhabitable. They argued we were too small, lacking enough resources or intelligence to be sovereign. We see climate colonialism in how they've continued with these plans, abandoning the contaminated plants and bases while adding new ones, pharmaceuticals, transgenic crops, coal plants, proposed waste incinerators, and methane gas infrastructure. We felt climate colonialism with their $74 billion debt crisis generated by corruption and speculation, and the imposition of a fiscal control board by the United States to make sure we pay for it through austerity. We felt it with hurricanes Irma and Maria, which showed how impoverished, extracted, polluted territories become so deadly when facing climate disasters. The same we saw with other hurricanes in New Orleans, Bahamas, Nicaragua, Mozambique, and so on. We saw this colonialism in how they laughed at the 4,645 dead from Maria and cheered the emptying of the country with the immigration of tens of thousands. We saw climate colonialism in how businesses and politicians use these tragedies as opportunities to make profit, pay illegal debts, award billions in contracts to corporate vultures, displace communities, and reduce and privatize essential services, health, schools, electricity. Yet we also imagined and experimented with decolonial futures. As an imperative to change everything, decolonizing the climate means reimagining justice and freedom to nurture our commons, our coasts and oceans, our mountains and rivers, our energy, our food, our communities. Such a decolonial approach involves interconnecting struggles for self-determination, land territory, and racial and gender justice. After Maria, drawing on the deep insurgent legacies of our islands, we affirmed, we don't need austerity. The disaster is the colony. Fists clenched in a sign of resistance. We joined forces with climate justice movements to denounce this disaster capitalism. We saw how making commons meant interweaving movements for debt cancellation and reparations, for solidarity and self-management, food and energy sovereignty, and climate action now. Making decolonial climate commons requires taxing and degrowing the rich to reduce excess luxury emissions and allow space for livelihood emissions for all. To support adaptation and redress the damages from the colonial climatic disasters. It requires transferring this wealth to the most impacted communities in the front lines of the climate crisis, which are also the ones most often leading with solutions. This also means fighting for a debt audit now and the elimination of illegal debts which cripple our ability to act. In Puerto Rico, feminist and anti-colonial movements reimagined anti-debt futures, new agreements that put people before the debt, make the banks pay, end corporate welfare, and recognize colonial debts. We do not owe, we are the creditors. Solo el pueblo salva el pueblo. The colonial climate futures demand that we build new relations and labors of care in common. We saw this after Maria in the dozens of mutual aid initiatives that are organized to share food and other basic needs in their communities, helping clean up debris, serving solidarity, not charity. These projects, such as the community kitchen in Mariana featured in the picture, were moved by happiness, countering the sorrow from the government's criminal negligence. Because in the fissures of the crisis, there is joy, for without it, there is death, as Anna Portnoy says. Taking sovereignty into our own hands, we learned that communities are best chance of survival, and that we can move from despair to healing and forge a new Puerto Rico. Rebuild homes and mobilize for the right to housing and to stay in place, expand agroecological farms for food sovereignty, develop new models of collective land ownership and of community energy. Reconfiguring how we produce and consume energy is an urgent task for the colonial climate future. This requires commoning energy. Organizations like Casa Pueblo, People's House in the Central Mountains, and the Hobos Bay Eco Development Initiative in the South Coast have led the movement to enact an equitable, democratic national solar energy transition. Against the government's plans to continue fossil fuel slavery, Casa Pueblo's 50% Consol and Idebajo and others, We Want Sun, have envisioned the sun as key to an energy future that is ours. They have enacted community solar projects to address basic energy needs, provide local employment, and regenerate communal ties, but also to de-link from energy colonialism, to create their own utopia of energy commons without waiting for change from above. The colonial climate futures are common in the public sphere, defending and reclaiming essential services indispensable to the common good. We see this in the emerging movements against privatizing the energy system to LUMA, a consortium of 2 North American methane gas infrastructure companies. Concerted resistance is emerging between environmental justice and climate action activists, labor organizations from electricity, education, and transport, feminists against the debt and privatization, amongst others. They show how privatization is incompatible with the renewable energy transition or with guaranteeing just recovery processes in future climate disasters. They denounce the stealing of our basic services through imposed illegal contracts. When they privatize everything, they will have deprived us of everything, as Maria Olga Reyes points out. Drawing on the inspiration of the mass mobilizations that expelled the highly corrupt governor Ricky Rosselló in the summer of 2019, the movement promises to offer another combative summer. They remind us that without justice, there will be no peace. Decolonizing the climate means building commons movement that's pushed for the necessary actions now to ensure livable futures. Beyond the dominant discourse of emergency and crisis, which foresees only more crisis, we have found emergence and hope of something new. We have learned to achieve together what we could not achieve separately, understanding that all our justice struggles are interconnected. We have seen that it takes roots to weather the storm, as put by the Climate Justice Alliance. We reimagine just recovery as systemic changes, not climate changes, as building collective power, agency, and self-determination. Because justice without power is impotent, and power without justice is tyranny. We fight to transition from an extractive economy into a regenerative one, imagining new socio-ecological treaties for a dignified future. It is a future full of creative and destructive possibilities, building island worlds in which we thrive, where all that we have is what we owe to one another, as Adriana Garriga, quoting Fred Moulton, says. Finally, to counter the repeated failures of international negotiations, a proliferation of multi-sided actions will be needed, from neighborhood and municipal to national and transnational, an islanding that builds collective protection and healing, that creates hope for humanity as a global archipelago. This takes us to our neighbors in the Dominican Republic, who fight against the expansion of coal infrastructures and their toxic ashes, to Haiti, fighting against a military occupation and a crippling extortionary debt, to Cuba, which despite a criminal blockade, has been one of the leaders in climate adaptation and food sovereignty in the region. It takes us to Colombia, where we join arms against the crimes of Duque and coal mining, for peace and for a just energy transition. To Chile, with the Mapuche's century-long struggle to recover their ancestral lands, and with the movement for a new constitution with the environment at its core. To Palestine and all indigenous peoples longing to be free and in peace. To the Pan-African nations who advocate climate justice and reparations. To the Zapatista encounters and the movements sprouting across Europe against new lithium mining rush in Portugal, for agroecology and food justice in Romania, for degrowth paths beyond Shell in the Netherlands. May we continue to weave these futures together. May this island Earth be for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor García López, for your inspiring lecture. You presented us numerous distressing facts and insights, but luckily, as a new chairholder, you also presented us a way forward for the future. And the term anthropocene will surely stick in my mind. Thank you very much. We will now move to the musical intermezzo featuring pianist Sonja Ninkblok of the Utrecht Studentenconcert. Sonja is a second-year medical student who has been playing with the Utrecht Studentenconcert since 2017. She will play April for you from Tchaikovsky's Seasons. April is a hopeful, cheerful piece in which the last snowflakes make way for blue snowdrops. Beautiful little blue flowers, symbolizing a fresh start. To us, that seemed to be in keeping with the current period, in which we are hoping that after another phase of lockdown and restrictions, the world will be able to open up again if all is well. A world where we can visit one another and profit from the lessons we have learned in our quest for a sustainable and better future. Enjoy. Thank you very much for that beautiful music, Sonja. It was already a festive event, but you made it even more joyful. We will now move on to Professor Seye Abimbola's inaugural lecture. As of the 1st of September 2020, Professor Seye Abimbola holds the Prince Claus Chair at Utrecht University on Justice in Global Health Research. Seye Abimbola is a health systems researcher from Nigeria, and he is currently senior lecturer at the School of Public Health, University of Sydney in Australia. Seye Abimbola has a very inspiring personality with an impressive career path. The goal of his research is to take lessons from his research on health systems governance and apply them to inform and improve global health practice. He is the editor-in-chief of BMJ Global Health. Professor Abimbola, the floor is yours.
Her Majesty Queen Maxima, rectors, members of the Curatorium of the Prince Claus Chair in Equity and Development, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I speak to you today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. As we share knowledge in this virtual space today, I recognize their long-standing scientific knowledge practices and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. There is something else I must acknowledge: my difficult relationship with global health. What we know as global health today began as a strategic enabler of European colonization of much of the rest of the world, as colonial medicine, missionary medicine, tropical medicine, and even military medicine. Unfortunately, global health is yet to shed its colonial origins. My work as Prince Claus Chair is one way in which I am trying to make peace with global health. Can we rescue global health from its origins? In the first part of this lecture, I will talk about colonial love. In the second part, I will explore 3 quotes about love and justice. In the third part, I will conclude by highlighting the need for rules, even in love. There is a well-known saying that all is fair in love and war. It speaks to the notion that anything goes when one's goals are pure, that you can wreak havoc all you want in the pursuit of something worthy, true love, winning a war, being kind, being generous. No matter how appealing this sentiment may be, or how useful it is as an excuse for bad behavior, we know that it is not true. All is not fair in love and war. I brought up the saying because colonialism was and continues to be very much a combination of love and war. Perhaps more war than love, but love manages to show up. In the midst of all the war, the invasion, the pillage, the theft, the dispossession, the horrors, the racism, the disrespect, the torture, the terror, the killings. In the midst of all that, there was also love. Think of missionary medicine or colonial medicine, looking after the natives, civilizing the natives. Many colonizers believed it was love, but it was the kind of love that made war palatable. Instead of justice, colonial love served to justify pillage and dispossession. One of the greatest evils of colonization is the evil of gaslighting. In the name of colonial love, people were made to question their own thoughts, memories, and knowledge. Gaslighting is easier in the context of love, however perverse. It made people doubt the validity of their own conceptual tools for making sense of the world. It made the colonized unable to function fully in their capacity as knowers, as holders, producers, and users of knowledge. This gaslighting, this injustice that stems from colonial love is known as epistemic injustice. And people are asking ever more stridently, to what extent is academic global health a grand exercise in gaslighting? To what extent does global health remain an expression of colonial love? And if it is, then what is the war of dispossession that it serves to excuse and justify? I was born, raised, educated in Nigeria, a country that did not exist before European invasion. With deep inequities between social and ethnic groups, Nigeria continues to struggle to exist as a nation. I currently live and work in Australia, a settler colony whose indigenous peoples continue to suffer profound oppression and inequities due to European invasion. In both Australia and Nigeria, as in most other countries around the world, the mission of global health is to use knowledge to achieve equity in health. But for global health research to deliver on this mission, there must be justice in all the processes, principles, values, and procedures involved in global health research. Getting there is a long journey. What I want to share with you today is the wisdom that guides my thinking on this journey. 3 quotes which I carry in my head constantly as I think about justice in global health research. The first quote is by Cornel West, an African-American writer, activist, academic, and philosopher. This quote is how I define justice. In his words, justice is what love looks like in public. It speaks to an idea of love that contrasts very sharply with what I described earlier as colonial love. In public policy, in health policy, in global health, there cannot be love without justice. Contrast love as justice with colonial love. Colonial love is the kind of love that is content with maintaining existing relations of power. It is the difference between charity and redistributive justice, between donating COVID-19 vaccines and ensuring that countries around the world have access to the knowledge and resources that will enable them to produce said vaccines. Global health requires acting at a distance. The distance between the helper and the helped. The distance is not always physical. It is also a distance of power across divides of class, income, status, gender, race, caste, ethnicity. It cuts across geographies. It exists inside and between countries. Justice is about reducing that distance. To love you, I must respect you. I cannot love you on my terms. I have to love you on your own terms, how you want to be loved. So colonial love is no love at all. Justice is what love looks like in public. In global health research, it is colonial love when the knowledge of marginalized people is not taken seriously, when their needs and perspectives are not what define our research questions, when they are not the primary audience of the knowledge that we produce. It is colonial love when our work does not begin from an emancipatory place, when instead of solving the structural and systemic problems that create inequity, we are content with tinkering on the edges. When colonial love persists, as it does in global health, the aggrieved cries for justice. And this brings me to the second quote. If justice is the solution, then how does justice work? The second quote comes from the Ifa verses, which is a central element of the belief system of my ancestors, the Yoruba people of West Africa. The version that I used was distilled and translated by Wole Soyinka, a Nigerian writer, activist, playwright, and philosopher. My ancestors said, justice is the mortar that needs the dwelling place of man. They asked, can mere brick on brick withstand the bloodied cries of wrong from the aggrieved? Now listen to their answer. No more than dark withstands the flare of lightning, or roofs of straw the path of thunderbolts. Shango, the Yoruba god of justice, restores. My ancestors saw justice as fundamentally restorative, as a path to healing, restoring the house of knowledge that the colonizers destroyed. By this, they mean there cannot be peace without justice. They say the dwelling place of man is weak in the absence of justice. They say justice is the mortar that needs the dwelling place of man. We cannot live together without justice. We cannot work together without justice. We cannot love each other without justice. More and more people from every corner of the world are adding their voices to calls to decolonize global health, to redress persisting injustices in how we use and produce knowledge in global health. These calls have been directed at us researchers, what we study, and how we value and use different kinds of knowledge, and the choices we make about who is recognized as an author and how research is framed. the only meaningful response to these calls is justice. Justice means rethinking all the assumptions that underpin knowledge production and use in global health. It means reversing the power asymmetries in whose knowledge is seen, used, and valued. Justice requires rules. What is allowed, what is allowable, what is prohibited, the rules of engagement. All is not fair in love and war. The question then is, what are the rules? On what basis might they be crafted? I have come to think that the most important norm or principle is mutual liberation or emancipation. By this, I mean the recognition that we both need each other. The helper and the helped need each other. This leads me to the third and final quote, which is credited to Lila Watson, an Indigenous Australian elder, artist, activist, and philosopher. Here it is. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. What Lila Watson is offering here is an invitation to a form of enlightened self-interest. But the self-interest here is not the material kind. The self-interest here is liberation, emancipation. Why do you want to help me? Is it because you recognize a certain pain or something missing in yourself? What is it? Can you own up to it? It is like being in love. You both need each other in a very deep way. Each of you knows that there is something in yourself that is missing, something the other person fulfills. It is a two-way need. The helping is two-way. It is not charity. It is two people liberating each other. It is justice. Each person, group, organization, or country with power will have to confront their own brokenness, the pain, the weaknesses that they are most desperate to ignore. When we say that global health research remains colonial, what we are saying is that it is a system of people, groups, organizations, and countries that are too afraid to admit to themselves that they need help. It is a system that was set up to extract knowledge, to disregard and destroy local and indigenous knowledge. It is a system that harms even while it is trying to help. It is colonial love. We must get to a place where we both acknowledge that we need each other to be made whole, that the sin of dispossession harms the colonizer and the colonized, the oppressor and the oppressed, the master and the enslaved, the rich and the poor. We cannot legislate love. We cannot compel love, but we can craft rules that govern our relationships, what we do, how we do it, the kind of knowledge we produce, whose needs and whose knowledge takes precedence, and how knowledge is used, produced, and circulated. So let us return to where we started. I began by evoking the saying, all is fair in love and war. What ties love and war together is desire, that deep-seated need for which one is willing to make sacrifices. But even in war, we humans have over millennia developed moral principles for what is just and fair. We must now do the same for love in global health. The people who are most difficult to make rules for are those people who believe very deeply that they are acting for the good of another or for the greater good. But empathy is not enough. Good intentions are not enough. We cannot truly help people without seeing the world through their eyes and seeing ourselves as they see us. That requires humility and respect, the very antithesis of colonial love. Even then, crafting rules to promote justice must be a continuous activity. Relations between the helper and the helped shift continuously, and so must the rules that govern the engagement. Justice is not an outcome, it is a process, a moving target. A new set of rules creates a new state of affairs, which may be unjust in new ways. The current oppressors are very often the previously oppressed. I am not exempt from responsibility myself. I too enjoy many privileges. In my life and in my work, I move between spaces. In some spaces, my status is high, and in others, my status is low. My shifting positions give me the benefit of perspective. With that benefit comes great responsibility. But I can only do a tiny bit. I have many fellow travelers on this journey, people I learned from in classrooms, on Twitter, in books, and on podcasts. I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from and with them. I first learned about equity as a child, watching my mother, a nurse midwife. She often broke rules or would craft new rules so that many women and children would not need her clinical help in the first place. I am forever grateful for her example. I also thank my family and friends, and especially my wife, Oine Omaku, and our two lovely daughters, Erin and Kuri, who continue to indulge my excesses and support my work. I will forever repay their love and loyalty. In my research in Nigeria, I have learned a lot from studying how ordinary people work in groups to improve their own health and care services. I see the same among indigenous peoples in Australia. Their knowledge of what is good for them is far superior to what I read in many research papers. The knowledge infrastructure of global health must learn to serve their knowledge needs first and foremost. The journey to decolonize global health is long. I am convinced, reading his writings, that His Royal Highness, Prince Claus himself, was on such a journey. I am grateful for the opportunity to spend time thinking about these issues in his name. I am also grateful for the new friends, colleagues, and fellow travelers that I have gathered due to this appointment, this honor as Prince Claus Chair. Together, we're exploring ways in which we may make visible instances of epistemic injustice in global health so that we can find avenues to promote justice in how we produce, use, and circulate knowledge in global health. Underpinning the work we are doing are the three sets of ideas that I have talked about in this lecture. The idea that justice is what love looks like in public, that justice is the only way to decolonize academic global health, and that although we cannot legislate love, we need to craft rules for working together. Our mission to achieve equity in health globally demands no less. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Seye, and thank you for the audience for the applause, which I think you deserve as no other. Of all the chairholders I've met during my period as chair of the curatorium, yours is closest to my own discipline. And as I listened to you, I realized that the socioeconomic inequities that were very much at the basis of the traditional 19th century public health, the start of our field, our discipline, were revived by the COVID-19 pandemic, in which we know that none of us will be safe until we're all safe. I'm happy that you're in charge of the Prince Claus Chair at this moment. This is also the moment that I will hand over to my successor as chair of the curatorium. I've been privileged to serve as the chair since 2014. And over those years, we've seen an evolution of the chair, embracing more and more disciplines in which equity and development are important and driving forces, both in academia and in the way research is translated into policy and political decisions. During that period, we've also professionalized the bylaws and the rules of operation that we've operated for the chair. So I feel we've grown into a solid and important part of Dutch academia, and we're very happy to welcome so many of you as part of our community. Indeed, it was my greatest pleasure as chair of the curatorium to be allowed to Skype with all of you before the final appointment decision was made. It was those conversations that led me to believe that in setting up this exchange, we really add something of value, both to your careers and to our academic community here. Thank you, all of you, for what you've done over those years. Of course, also a thank you to our patron, who, when she stepped down as chair of the curatorium, took on being a very active and present patron. It's wonderful to have you part of our community over these years. I thank the different members of the curatorium who were part of my presence there, and I want to give a very special thank you to Linda and Rian, who as secretary of the curatorium always made sure that everything ran the way it should. And this is the moment where I symbolically will hand over the staff, the chieftain staff, that in 2014 was handed to me by my predecessor. It is a staff from Africa that was given to Prince Claus. And as such, it symbolizes, I think, what he has done in giving us a good ground for setting up the Prince Claus Chair. Somebody who saw it recently said to me, if you use it carefully and you hold it well, it will tell you where to search for gold and for water. Now, I think that we are not so very much in search of gold and water. But if it can help us to bring wisdom to the different approaches to equity and development, as we've done in the Prince Claus Chair, I hand it over gladly to Bert Koenders, who is my successor. I wish you all the luck and all the wisdom this staff will give you for the future Prince Claus Chairholders.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you for handing this over to me. And thank you for everything that you've done for the foundation. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But I will try to fill in your footsteps, which will be a difficult job. And let me say a few things. Your Majesty, Queen Maxima, Louise, Rectores, esteemed holders past and present of the Prince Claus Chair, Professor Gupta, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a pleasure and an honor indeed to receive this staff symbolizing the chairmanship of the curatorium of the Prince Claus Chair in Development and Equity. Prince Claus has been a great inspiration to me. I will never forget that I had the opportunity to meet with him just after my studies in the 1980s. It was a time that the original views he developed during his diplomatic career, including in Africa, were far ahead of his times. His pertinent ideas on local and inclusive solutions for poverty eradication inspired me during my time as Minister for Development Cooperation in this country. And when I later worked as head of 2 UN peacekeeping operations, one in the Ivory Coast, my first interlocutor during the peace negotiations we had in Côte d'Ivoire had put a picture on purpose on his desk and with great respect, namely the picture of Prince Claus, who had served in the Ivory Coast. And when I came there, he said, this has been my example, and I felt the pressure to be in his footsteps. It was a message that I think resounded well. Prince Claus always underlined the impossibility to develop a human being or a people or a nation from outside. Development should be a joint effort, in his view, based on praxis, on combining interdisciplinary theorizing with proven, practical, and local solutions. Development and equity and development, as two sides of the same coin, both nationally, but also globally. I think he was also a very keen observer of the inequity of the world trade system during his times. Today, the COVID crisis reveals how the pandemic and its health, economic, political, and social consequences can only be solved if, and you said that also, Louise, if we see it as an international public good, if we end vaccine nationalism, and if we really try to solve these issues together and put equity and development together as two sides of one coin. The topics of two lectures, the excellent lectures that we heard this morning, reflect, I think, also the spirit of this chair. Thanks to the chair holders, of course, Professor Gustavo García López and Professor Seye Abimbola. The Prince Claus Chair in this time and age calls for the voices of a new generation of academics from the Global South to be heard here in the Netherlands and in their own countries at the same time, one not without the other. We need to understand and analyze together, I think, in the areas that were discussed this morning, build bridges and put all emphasis on rationality, research, and science-based solutions for our global problems. And I think that is more than ever needed in times of confusion and manipulation of truth. Professor Ginnering, Louise, in 2014, you took over the role of chairperson of the Prince Claus Chair Curatorium from then Princess Máxima. From all concerned, I heard the same analysis. Louise fulfilled her task with great commitment, knowledge, and skills. She has welcomed many new chairholders during their inaugural address, but also, and you mentioned that just a few minutes ago, in very personal conversations prior to their appointment and during their period as chairholders. You contributed enormously to the further development of the chair. It's always good for somebody who succeeds you. A lot has been done. As well as the mutual bond between what I think is important, the chairholders and their postdocs. Louise was not only an excellent chair and administrator, but, according to all former chairholders and colleagues mentioned to me, her personal insights, tone and initiative are shown after the evaluation of the Prince Claus Chair and during the lustrum. Louise, a big thank you very much on behalf of all of you for this great and important contribution. I would also like to thank everyone for attending the first and hopefully also the last inaugural lectures on screen. First of all, many thanks to the chairholders who have inspired us this morning and to the organizing institutions, the International Institute of Social Studies, Erasmus and Utrecht University, and especially the rectors present here today, of course, Professors Hutter, Kummeling, and Van der Duin. And of course, a very special thanks to Her Majesty Queen Máxima. It's a great honor that you were with us this morning. Thank you for your inspiration and your crucial and personal commitment to the Prince Claus Chair in your role as patroness. Last but not least, I would like to thank all those who organized this event in front and behind the scenes. And I thank especially all those who tuned in and who looked at their Zoom screens and listened. And I look forward to seeing you all next year, and hopefully in a live version of the Prince Claus Chair inaugural lectures. Thank you very much.